The two Jills, a psychologist and psychic intuitive, reveal mind-blowing insights that turn psychology, self-help, and conscious teachings on their heads. Why? Because they work. Real help, sincere growth is here. Welcome to Psyched.
Hi, Jill.
Hi, Jill.
All right. The topic today is the blame game, and you just told me it's one of your favorites.
It is. I absolutely love it, and probably not for the reasons that people think. But this is the thing that we all do, and we don't realize how. We talk about sovereignty all the time. We don't realize how degrading of that sovereignty this is. So that's why I love it so much.
I guess I'll tee up for people that at least, and I can't wait to hear your side of the blame game and your advice and strategies for people. I want to point out that for me, it isn't just about a person, like blaming a person. Sometimes we blame a situation and we use it as an excuse for why we can't be our best self or why we can't grow and evolve and be the person that we want to be. So for me, blame doesn't have to be a person.
I love that. I mean, yeah, it's anything that holds you back.
Exactly.
Right? And it comes in so many forms, and a lot of them are insidious. And that's why I'm so glad we're talking about it today.
That's good.
Because it touches you unawares.
That's good. Okay. Do you want to give some context about what you mean by blame?
I'd love to. All right. So I'm going to actually start off with an example that's been going on in my life right now. I'm having a whole bunch of health issues, right, going on. And the doctors are looking for the cause, of what's going on with me. And it turns out that it's from how my braces were taken care of when I was 13 years old. And it affected my whole system. You can't imagine. It's fascinating. However, what I notice is when I go into blame, whether I want to blame the doctor or I want to blame my parents or I want to blame, the limitation of tech at that time, I feel so disempowered from helping myself because it seems unfixable. Blame makes things anchored and solid. And it just every time I accidentally go down that road, I was like, okay, Jill, you got to stop that. This is not about blame. You can't move forward and have blame in your purview at all. Right? So that's just an example of not so much, everybody knows what blame is, right? But that's a little bit of the mechanics of what's been happening to me lately when I fall asleep for a minute and I want to blame someone for the situation that I'm in right now. Right?
Great example. Yeah. And it's not that root cause isn't important, right? It's that if it is used in the context of powerlessness and it's not balanced enough with solutions and strategies and what we're going to try in this situation, because you can't go back to when you had the braces on when you were, 13 years old. We can't change the past, but I find that even in my work with my clients, I'm really careful about, number one, I am focused on root causes, not from a historical perspective, but the current thinking, right, that's leading to this, or the current structure of your mouth in this situation, right, and what we can do now. But I'm super careful with that because I am so aware of, let's just say, the trappings of conventional therapy. I had a family member that I'm going to be careful about how I share this since it is so personal. I know someone in my extended family that sought therapy for a certain condition when she was a teenager. And she stopped going to therapy after the first 3 sessions. And in those first 3 sessions, apparently was the process that therapist used anyway, of who do we help this person find blame for so that she doesn't keep beating up on herself. And so that happened to be a family member. So she still to this day 35 years later still has this, harbored resentment against that person because she never got to the other part of therapy. So it did take, I think, some of the pressure off herself. But anyway, it was just a really unfortunate situation because it's like, okay, but what do you do about it now? So anyway, right. I'm really cautious. That's a personal kind of like, okay, I don't want to, if somebody only sees me a few times, I want to make sure that I'm empowering them without disempowering another, or without giving them like a scarecrow to kind of, or not a scarecrow, but like a battering ram kind of situation of, yes, it's all their fault, right?
Right. And I think it's so important. The question is not who can we blame? The question for the present is, who are we blaming right now for where we're at? Okay. So if in your financial situation, take a look, ask yourself that question. Who am I blaming now? Am I blaming my spouse? Am I blaming my job? Am I blaming myself? Right? You want to know all those places in your life and go through, blame. Are you blaming the church? Are you blaming God? Are you blaming, the barista? I don't care. Right? Looking at all of those places where you're probably unsatisfied or feeling helpless, or this is my lot, and ask yourself, who am I blaming? Because that's a present question. To your point, it's the current thinking. Yes, it has a base in history, but we've done that. The past is the past. We're not changing the past. We don't need to. And we also don't have to be beholden to it. And that's why blame keeps the past alive like nothing else. Like nothing else.
The other part. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jill.
No, go ahead.
The other part that I noticed, and I just heard this in an example podcast, and an example yesterday in a podcast where there was somebody with a similar background to mine in economics, and yours too, you have an undergrad in economics, was bringing up the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street movement, for those that are old enough to remember that. It wasn't that long ago, but it wasn't so much about empowering those that are in lower economic and lower financial classes. It was more about trashing and bringing down and, in a way, demonizing those that were in the upper income brackets and the upper economic strata. So it's like, okay, so what are we doing here? And I guess their primary motivation was probably to help and even things out and all those things that still continue today. But it was just an interesting, let's blame. It was very much about blame. Let's blame them. They've had more than their fair share. But so if somebody is going to go through a process of, like you were talking about, what am I blaming for my current unfortunate circumstances? I guess my next recommendation would be the column next to it. If there's a column of, okay, I'm blaming these people or these structures or these institutions. The second column is, can I do anything about that? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, right? Number three, the third column might be, do I expect that situation to change in the short term, like the next year, or even at all in my life? Or is this possibly the state of affairs for the next decades or the next, for the rest of my life? That gives you better, fair information about this may not change, right? And then another column, because I like to be not complicated, but I like to look at the big picture, right?
Yes,
Was there any merit to some of those systems coming into place? In other words, those that have been demonized or villainized, might they have had actually some positive, thoughtful, conscious intentions with it that weren't harm-based or negligent or malevolent, right? And that part is the whole maybe there's more to the story here, right? Maybe the IRS and the creation of the Fed wasn't for the downfall of humanity. You know what I mean? There's so many, in hindsight, we can really look at, well, clearly it was created with a malevolent purpose. So it's like, but was it though? Right? Or was it in response to a lot of other things and, trying not to recreate the Depression and, or create anyway, there's just a lot of ways that things can be used malevolently that weren't created for malevolence, right? And then there's that final column. What do I want to do about it? That's my favorite column. Okay, but what are you going to do about it, right? And I've been watching as a friend your process with the braces and the alignment and all these things, and I see you being very empowered by, okay, and I'm exploring what I am going to do about it. I don't see you getting into the, you're not looking for that orthodontist from those years ago. You're moving forward from the present and, okay, what if I try this? What if I try that? And I love that approach. I have another example, by the way, when it feels right.
I did have a 2-day pity party, and my husband was like, this is so unlike you. This is not the way you handle things. And he was worried. He was actually worried. This one did take me down a place where that he didn't recognize. And I just want to say, it is important what you're saying. Like when I say, find out who you're blaming, it's all in service of empowerment. Because while you are blaming, you are disempowered. And not only that, you feel justified in being, in a weird way, like with the Occupy Wall Street, aggressive against other people. It brings out parts of you that don't serve you, but in fact deepen the issue of, I don't like where I am, and now I'm acting in ways that are aggressive, albeit justified under the current system of blame, but only blame justifies that action. And blame is never justified. I'm going to say that. It's never justified. And it doesn't mean you're letting somebody off the hook, right? But we are trying to blame somebody not for what they did, but for our circumstances. And that is never justified. Doesn't mean people don't do bad things. That is a given here. We've discussed that, right? But blaming somebody for where you are is the quickest way to give your power right to them. That's literally, I see that as a death sentence. I really do.
That's huge. I just want to feel that was, I love how you put that, Jill. Speechless. It's perfect. It doesn't go anywhere, right? It doesn't lead someone to the solutions that I think they think it does. And that's my concern, I would say, about sort of activism in general, at least in our current times. It does seem to be so focused on the injustice in a way that disempowers, but it feels empowered because it gives a container for that anger and that rage and that sense of unfairness. And that can be healthy. I think, like, you had your 2-day titty party. That's hilarious. Maybe it was a titty party too. I don't know. A 2-day pity party, right? But a 2-day pity party where you're just kind of like this, like, I just want to be sad. I just want to grieve. I just want to be super bummed out that this is unfair. I think that is so healthy, because there's parts of us that are, I look at it as layers of myself that just want me as the wider version of myself to acknowledge this is so unfair. Whether I'm acknowledging that for myself or for another person that something happened to or is happening to, this is so unfair. But, and this sounds so cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. This reality is not fair, right? So acting as if we can make it fair, or we can fix this, or this is a solvable problem, I don't think is always accurate. And I think those movements and a lot of activism can be very misleading. And that concerns me, because that doesn't mean that we need to be okay with injustice or unfairness, but I think we need to be honest with ourselves about what we can fix and what we need to just be sad about, right? Because sometimes we transition quickly to anger, because that anger tends to feel better than sadness or grieving, because it does feel more empowered. But if it doesn't go anywhere and it doesn't fix the problem, I don't think it's helping anybody.
I agree. If there's not, to me, this realm is one where all solutions create new problems. That's why we're on this kind of wheel where we pendulum swing back and forth. Let's raise the Fed's rates. Let's lower the Fed's rates. We're just swinging on a vine here.
Pendulum, yeah, back and forth.
When you solve for X, you've identified a problem. You solve for X, you create a host of other problems, hence the inflation that we have now, right? And everybody's saying you should have done it differently. That's not the way this place works. There are no solutions. We're riding the waves. That's all we're doing here. We're not fixing anything, right? And I think in the activism aspect, it's so convenient to blame, right? But when you blame, you abdicate your own responsibility. And that is hugely dangerous, right? And it's blaming another says, look over there, look at that person. I don't need to look at myself. That person needs to look at themselves. And I'm not saying you look at yourself in a way that now you blame yourself. I'm saying you bring it all back in and you say, I'm going to take stock. I have these circumstances. This is where I am. If I'm waiting for somebody else to change so that I could feel better or so that my circumstances can change, that's so flimsy. That is the literal definition of helplessness. So blame means I don't want to help myself. I'm choosing. When you're choosing to blame, you are choosing not to help yourself. And I don't know. I can't. That's all I want to say. I think I'm done.
No, that's good. I thank you for adding that. There's a couple things I want to say, and one might be extremely controversial. And I just want to acknowledge that beforehand, that I'm aware of that it may be very upsetting. It might be a very new concept for a lot of people. But part of my operating system is the ability to consider really, really big and different ideas, like existential sorts of things. And one hypothesis that I have is that we, as the range of us that operates beyond our humanness, which is infinite, chooses our parents, chooses our birth date, chooses our birth location. Okay, that's a lot of choosing, right? So we can't prove that that's true, and we can't disprove or prove alternative hypotheses, which tend to fit in the realm of religion, philosophy, things like that. But if my hypothesis is true, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Because then a lot of the things that people are really upset about, well, it's not fair that I was born in, not me, but that someone was born into, an impoverished country, whether they're in just a really like Haiti or something like that, right? Or that's unfair that I'm a certain race. That's unfair that I've been limited by my culture. That's unfair that, right? It's very interesting, again, if that hypothesis is true but what if you, as your widest range of yourself, call it whatever you want, I call it soul, or your widest range of self, your creative origin layers. What if that part of you was like, oh, I'm curious about that. What if I chose these parents, this birth location, this birth time, right? And sort of having some context awareness of what that would mean, right? Oh, that would be interesting, right? So then is it so unfair? Or so did something happen to you? Or is there a wider range of you that was curious with love and with pure benevolence, was just curious about having this experience, not for your pain and suffering or so that you would learn lessons, but just it wanted to check it out, right? That would be fascinating, right? So that is my hypothesis. To me, it helps explain a lot more about this reality and things that happen, and that it's not that it isn't unfair from in this reality, but it didn't happen to us in that context. I am biased towards self-authority, though.
And I am too. And so, but you have to be here. If you don't have self-authority, you are a victim of your circumstances. There's no other way to be. Those are your only two choices. You are sovereign or you are flapping in the breeze, right? So I think what you're saying, and you use the word unfair, but truthfully in that place, I would insert blame, right? So what you're saying is, if I have this viewpoint, I don't even care if it's true or not true, right? I care if I adopt this stance that I chose it here, where do I start going with that? You step right out of poor me and be like, okay, that's curiosity. That's interesting. I can work with that, right? And so people would say they do. I used to ask kids when I was working with kids, I would say, you know, they'll be like, my mom does this and we fight and, you know, whatever the issues are. And I would say to them, pretend you chose your parents. Just pretend. Just try it on. We don't have to go in whether it's true or not. But you start to see when there's no one to blame, be it God, the universe, whatever it is you're blaming for where you landed on this rock, right? When you can get all of that blame out of there, you're back to your sovereignty. So you're still, I don't care if stories are true. I care if they're empowering.
Oh, that's good.
Right?
I like that. Yeah, that's good. And I feel like just maybe I'm getting self-defensive here. That's okay. I'll own it if I am. The reason I talked about the truth and proving it kind of thing is that I am acknowledging that some of my philosophies and beliefs are unprovable, but that doesn't mean they're not useful, right? And I think some of us walk around with similar frameworks and we pretend that they're true. We pretend that they're proven and they're not. And that goes back to our belief episode.
Right.
There was something I wanted to add. Let me see if I can grab it in my wider space here. Maybe it doesn't matter, but there is another example I want to give. Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I worked in a not-for-profit. I did financial analysis in a local not-for-profit hospital. Sorry about here in my face. And I was only there a year. It was a weird environment for me. Being a, business major, I was getting my MBA at the time. Anyway, it was just very strange. And one weird situation happened where some problem occurred, some like, oh my God, this is terrible. Somebody did this wrong and it's created all these problems. I was so much into, okay, we've got to figure out the solution. And I found my boss and my peer that reported to my boss, they were so focused on blame, Jill, because there was a huge CYA, cover your ass environment that was going on there that I was less aware of somebody's head's going to get chopped from this. And we need to make sure we have those answers. And I could smell the dysfunction of all of this. And it was because I already had a proposal of, okay, we could do this, to solve the problem, right? Because it was a problem, somebody did mess up. But I was like, my head was, let's figure out who is to blame for it after we get the problem solved, after we, figure out the holes and covering them and who needs to be covered, right? To fix the problem. They were only focused on blame. I think I had quit within a couple months. And the letter, I had the chance to, I don't think I had an exit interview, but I offered one via like an essay that I handed to HR about, look, this is a hospital my family uses. I want it to do well. And this is a weird situation that I think is unhealthy and unhelpful and just ridiculous. But it was so weird to see the superiors just go into, and I imagine a lot of institutions are like that, where the main and politics, right? A lot of institutions have, okay, we got to figure out who is to blame, make sure that, Michael Flynn, I mean, like there's a lot of kind of like, we have to figure out versus what are we going to do about the problem? Because if there's only like me, a lowly person that's only been there a year, so I had a good amount of, well, I don't want to say authority, but respect just give my background and the job that I had and the way that I did my job. But nobody was listening to me. Nobody was like, yeah, Jill, those are good ideas for how to solve it. I was invisible in that mode because I wasn't contributing to who is to blame for this. It was a witch hunt. It's crazy.
It is so toxic. And I think this is the land of mistakes. Everybody is making them all the time. And I love, from the Bible, it says, he who has not sinned can cast the first stone. Like, if we're not operating on that assumption all the time, because everybody is screwing up everything at all times, right? And I just don't feel like the standards we set for other people, the hypocrisy is unimaginable. Right. So I do the same thing as you. I think we are in the same camp on this, where we are problem solvers. That is what we do. I'm very scrappy about my problem solving, but I do take stock of the situation. I put my blinders on and I double down. And, my daughter says, where there's a Jill, there's a way. And that's really what I focus on, is finding a way. Right.
Exactly.
So if solutions do not have kindness in them, they will breed the next layer of problems. Right. It's almost like,
I would add grace and compassion too.
Yes.
And this goes back to another principle that you operate from, that you shared, is that when anybody is in like a hard situation or a disadvantaged situation, there's a part of you that acknowledges that could be me, right? And this fits in perfectly for that. That's somebody that maybe it's your orthodontist from when you were 13, right? There is a part of us that can go, ooh, I wonder if they were trying to do the right thing like I would have tried, like I try to do the right thing all the time. And what if it just didn't go the way that they wanted to? And that isn't always the case, but giving that amount of grace allows us to be, I think, a better version of ourselves than just automatically assuming, well, clearly they were negligent. Clearly they were. Now the outcome may have been look negligent or whatever, but there's so much we don't know, right? There are so many ways that good-hearted and intelligent and wise and maybe even expert level people, that sometimes their ideas or their policies don't have the intended effect. And I think we are a better version of ourselves when we acknowledge with grace and compassion, this might just be one of those things. And I have an example, Jill, that tends to work well for people.
Yes, please.
When their brain can't process, like, I don't know how to get beyond the unfairness of the wealth distribution. I don't know how to not blame so-and-so for this injustice. My brain can't get there. And a great example I like to offer is, what about the weather? What about like the fact that some people that live near the equator don't have, frigid winters, right? Are you mad at them? Are you mad at your situation? Do you feel like it's unfair? You got to fix this. We've got to hold somebody accountable. We don't do that about things that we acknowledge we don't have control over, right? So there's a sense of, well, it is what it is. I live in Idaho. Winters, you live in New York, and but when you're in New York in the winter, this is what we get. This is what it's like. We're not mad about it so much. We're not angry about it so much. It just is what it is, right? So I'm not talking about climate change. I'm not talking about like preventable fires and drought. Yeah.
Like it's raining today.
Yeah, exactly.
Light.
Exactly.
The things that we can choose.
There we go. So that's an example, though, of a system that our brain kind of doesn't go into fight or flight mode. It kind of accepts it and deals with it, grabs an umbrella, puts on a parka, whatever.
Yeah. And I think, I was reading somewhere where it really struck me, and it said, in order to forgive, you must first have blamed. And that really, really struck me, because forgiveness, interestingly, is not required, right? It's not blaming that's required. Forgiveness would never be necessary but for the fact that we blame, right? And so to me, it's like cut out, because the brain also cannot forgive. Once you decided somebody is to blame, the brain, forgiveness, as it's meant in, holy forgiveness, is impossible. It really turns out to be forgiveness, and we probably said this before, but it bears repeating, of superiority. I'm the better person, you're the lesser person for your transgression, right? And I forgive you. But the blame doesn't leave, right? In that sense, it still says, I'm forgiving you because I've blamed you, right? And because you've done something wrong. And to me, that's also a way that we hold on to these grudges and all of these things that are so toxic to us. And they're the antithesis of us being in service of ourselves, right? And not forgiving the self means I blame myself. Nothing could be more sad. Because to your point before, my husband says his thing, and I love it, is assume good intent. Assume good intent. Always. And you're not doing it because you're letting somebody off the hook. You're doing it because that keeps you where you need to be to function, to make choices from a really grounded place, to problem solve, to move forward. If you don't assume good intent, all your energies are toward vilifying another, and they don't move the dial. You make zero progress jumping from blame to blame to blame to blame.
Right. Okay. So I want to put in a very real example just to kind of test this system. And we may find we may want to add more language for certain individuals. So if there is somebody that was a victim of incest, let's say, right? Child sexual abuse, whatever. I would imagine, I can't imagine me anyway, in that client situation, advising them to assume that that person had positive intent. But I can imagine, and that situation is different, right? It's a very specific case. Assuming that that individual is mentally unwell, has unhealthy and illegal, right, intentions, but may not have been with malice. It may not have been, I want to hurt you. It may have just been extremely selfish and thoughtless and just screwed up, right? So then, because I think it's too much to ask a victim of abuse, and again, I'm taking a corner case here, but I love to have a system that can be used in all cases, right? So for the most part, I'm right with your hubby that let's assume positive intent, or at least let's not presume malevolence if something got screwed up or went badly. But then it allows the individual, whatever the experience, to just give more sense of, okay, they may not have tried, they may not have intended for me to be screwed up by the situation or harmed personally by the situation, but that is what happened, right? Let me hear from you on this.
Yeah, so I always say, I call it the WCS, the worst case scenario, right? What we tend to do with the worst case scenario is throw the baby out with the bathwater. So in our garden variety lives, if you just walk around for one day and assume good intent for the person who cut you in line, for the guy that's cutting you off speeding, like I always say, his wife is having a baby, he's got to get home. Right. So it's those types of things. Right. And some of them are quite indirect. Right. So even if it's politics, I believe, I'm going to put the worst case scenario over there. I'm going to address it. But I believe when I'm talking to parents or when I'm talking to clients, in every moment, we are doing the best we can with what we have. Even the people who are most seeming just really super disturbed, they are doing the best with what they got. Nobody wakes up and says, I want to be the shittiest person I can be today. Nobody wakes up like that. So regardless of what it looks like, people are trying. Now, when you go into the worst case scenarios of cases like incest and super horrible situations, those are the places that the brain uses, or the examples that the brain uses to discount everything we've said. All right. Now, in dealing with the worst case scenario, I don't know what you tell a person who is suffering. You know, I do those things in the moment, right? I do not prescript. When I'm sitting with somebody who is suffering, I get so quiet and so in myself. I so do not go to blame so that I can be where they cannot. All right. So, and I have chills. Right. So I will say, I'm not going to blame this person because I am going to work with the scenario to the benefit of the person that I'm speaking to. It does not help to pile on with this person did this to me and this person's a horrible person. And, you know, aren't I right? Isn't he horrible? Aren't I broken? Whatever. I will not see someone as a victim. I can see someone as harmed, as physically harmed and even abused, but I will not see them as a victim. And so that is, there's still a difference there in terms of the action and how the action is perceived. And blame still doesn't have to be a part of it.
Right. That's fair. And I do want to have a discussion before we wrap this up about blame versus accountability, right? Because I feel like that would be useful and just because I'm the one who teed this up, for my clients that have any sort of victimized situation that would be like easily proven, like, yeah, they're a victim of a crime or of abuse or something like that. I'm not as aversive to the term victim, or I don't want to say treating them as a victim, because I hear what you're saying. And I know that you and I are aligned on this. And there's a part of me that my approach tends to be very soulfully led to be able to say to them first, and this tends to come out first whenever this is in client work or coaching work. I'm so sorry that happened to you. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that.
Yes.
And it tends to let them relax, like, okay, good. Because there's that layer of them that is looking to hear that from somebody that they maybe respect or feel has some sort of, I don't want to say authority, but some sort of connection that is saying that with a sense of godliness or a connection of godliness to it, that, okay, good. Like, right. Because there aren't that many places we can get that in that world, right? In this world. And then it isn't, but this is definitely related to what you're talking about. It is so unfortunate when that client has met with traditional, maybe spiritual teachers or spiritual leaders or metaphysical practitioners like psychics or readers, etc., that have approached it as, well, yeah, okay, I can clearly see that this perpetrator that victimized you, oh, they had this going on in their karma, or you had this going on in your karma. And there's all of these disempowering layers and terms that are just, well, I guess this was meant to happen to me. And oh my God, it just drives me crazy. It's incredibly disempowering. It's also not even the past. It's some screwed up, what's that, Akashic record, sort of system that you have no control over, you had no authority over, and this was destined to happen, or that it was planned to happen. You were supposed to incarnate their theory, and they literally walk around with this idea that, well, I was incarnated to have this victimization experience happen to me. Yeah. I was incarnated to be victimized. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, number one, that can't be proven. That doesn't even have to be true. You're the one who makes that story true. Do you like that story? And hey, how about this one? Right? That this is horrible that this happened. Nobody deserves this to happen. This is, including you. You didn't deserve this to happen. God is sad about this as well. And then they can go, oh, really? Right? And then I'm offering them an entirely different framework in which to experience this version of their reality, and hopefully more freedom to move forward around this victimization situation. But they're
100%.
more than that, right? Anyway, so I know that you and I are aligned on that.
That's why when I say victim, meaning I'm not going to confirm their view of themselves as a victim. That's what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
And so what I like to do in these situations is you have to still watch the blame game here, because if you're not blaming that person, and I'm sure you see this in your work, I see it in mine, you're blaming yourself.
Yes, because they have to blame somebody, which they don't. They really don't have to blame anybody.
That's why we're having this conversation. If you don't see where the blame is, when you blame out, you feel empowered because you get aggressive, right? And it feels like it's empowering, but it's actually quite the opposite, because that person still has so much control while the blame is active. Right? So I find a lot of times that there's an insult, let's say going through divorce, right? So there's an insult, that meaning the divorce has happened. Let's say it's infidelity, right? And then the person gets comfortable with this new baseline of, okay, I'm not going to blame. And then it happens again. So while you're still connected to that blaming energy, anything that person does has an effect on you. If you have a person who has abused you in any way, and then you see them out in a crowd having a good time, that kills you, right? Or you see they came into money, that kills you. You must disconnect. Blame is the thing that's keeping you energetically connected. And it doesn't matter if you're blaming yourself or you're blaming someone else. So I don't care what the content of the blame is. I want you to look at your brain looking for who to blame for this situation. And then I only want you to work with the blame, not the circumstances that happened to you.
Yes.
Blame is the problem. Blame is stopping you from healing.
Yes.
That's the problem.
That's so good, Jill. Okay. I want to bring up examples, like more kind of pop culture almost, or, current event kind of examples. But first, I would love to have a discussion here about accountability versus blame. What would be your distinction between those two?
Look,
I can offer mine.
I think in order to live on this planet, right, we can't have people running around running with scissors. Right. So there is an accountability. And to me, that's not blame. There's an objectivity to our system, albeit our judicial system, albeit too objective at this point. There is no mercy and there's a lot of other things missing in it. But if you do the crime, you do the time. I don't actually even think that's punishment. I actually see it as consequence. Behaviors to consequences. They lead to outcomes. Every behavior leads to an outcome. Yes. Right? So to me, that's not even punishment. All right? So
I think for me, I like that. The delineation that I would offer between accountability and blame is blame implies intent. There's something more when we talk about blame that is more, like you said, baby with the bathwater. It kind of encompasses the entire person. That a person that did a horrible thing, then we want to make sure that they have no good things happen to them, which we have no control over that, right? So that would be the delineation. Accountability is more objective. Yes, they are accountable. That doesn't mean they meant for something bad to happen or a negative consequence or a negative outcome, but they are the one that could have changed and maybe prevented or responded better to a certain situation. So when I think of maybe...
Oh, okay. Let me just say this, because accountability, I think in that state, when you're blaming someone, you want that person to internally recognize your pain. That's connected to blame, not accountability. Right. Accountability is, you did this, you go to jail. There is a piece in our judicial system where you have to say what you did, but people are often not satisfied with even if people get jail time and even if they get life in prison, because they know that fundamentally that person isn't feeling their pain, right? That's when you know blame is to blame.
Right. Yes.
You get
because
that's important.
That's right. I love that, because this is complicated, right? When it comes to crimes and crimes with victims versus victimless crimes, right? Crimes with victims, there is this whole sense of, no, I need them to feel bad because then I'll feel better. I don't even think that's true. Yeah. I think when there is, whether they're a victim or somebody's been killed in a situation, right? There is so much pain and grieving and suffering there that there's no amount of sorrow and shame that perpetrator can feel that would be enough for them to feel, well, you know, it's as if the victimized family or whatever is thinking, well, if they just feel bad enough, then I'll feel better. No, you won't, because this is horrible, right? So there's a lot of tricks that the brain perpetrates on that individual. But let's make this a little bit more, like you said, everyday, normal 24 hours kind of situation. When we have one of our children is at her current stage of being not as clean, and she has her own car that we paid for, and we pay for insurance, and that car gets, it's disgusting. And every time my husband and I get in it, we're just like, oh my God, like, what is that sticky, like Dutch Bros, whatever, that's on the floor, and who spilled it? Like, it's disgusting. And I'm like, how? And then she'll say, it wasn't me, it was my friends. Right? So again, this isn't, and she goes immediately to a more standard, don't blame me, right? But she forgets that isn't how my family operates, right? It's who is accountable. This is your car. You were in the car when any of that happened. So I can't hold your friend accountable because I don't know who is holding that one in the back seat. All I know is your car and you were there. And we expect that with a car that we provide you, that you are going to keep it clean and manage or oversee the people that are in the car and how they behave, right? If it were me and I was in somebody's back seat as an adult, right, and I spilled something, I would be like, oh, hang on, I spilled something. Let's pull over really quick and get some water and take care of this. I would fix my mess. I recognize that everybody's like that, especially 17-year-olds.
But there's an issue here that I think we're really talking about that's super, super subtle here. Mm-hmm. While blame is operating, while that program is running, she feels legitimately not responsible.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, because she didn't do it.
That's what the issue is. That's why I say blame makes you abdicate responsibility. Mm-hmm. Okay, so while she's blaming, you can't even get in there with this reasonable thing because she's like, in her mind, I didn't do it. Right. I'm not to blame. Blame will block, for parents who are frustrated, blame will block any intervention you try to do. There will be no change while blame is active. And the blame concomitant thing that we have to realize, like, if you don't see blame, we try to get in through guilt, right? Mm-hmm. So blame and guilt are they're best buds, right? Yeah. So we are trying in a weird way. While she's in blame, when we say you need to clean it up, she's feeling like you are now blaming her and trying to make her feel guilty. And this is the deadlock of blame. And so with our judicial system, right, we want, if you can look at the judicial system as just, ones and zeros, you do this, this happens. That's the judicial system. It is not a healing system, right? And so we totally put way too much of our mental health, and it's so slow. So the delay, people don't know for 5 years that that's not the answer to their health. It's tragic, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're blaming somebody, we need them to feel guilty. Guilt is a feeling in this case, right? So we need them to feel guilty. So just watch those two pieces, right?
Yes.
There's no healing in blame. There is no healing in guilt. So if you're trying to guilt somebody into behaving a certain way, stop. Just hard no.
Mm-hmm. Nagging.
It can't, I'm telling you, from a brain perspective, it can't happen.
Yep.
It can't happen.
So the pop culture kind of situations that I think of this with the O.J. Simpson trial and the Brown family, right, and the Goldman family, just, I can't even imagine the frustration that some of them may be feeling about how OJ is, out and walking around and all these things and on Twitter and all this stuff. Meanwhile, their loved ones have passed, right? Anyway, that's just so weird. But then there's the example of, I think it's Gabby Petito or this young woman that was living in the van life with her and her boyfriend. And apparently there was some abuse situation. And now her family recently, this is in August 2022, her family is now suing I think it's the Wyoming or something, police force, because when there was a call to the police, they should have identified that she was in harm and they could have prevented this. And this is, to me, the perfect test case of the blame game, because I can see why they want to blame somebody / hold somebody accountable. And yet this is really complicated, right? Because there's a lot of us that could easily say, well, what was she doing with him? You know what I mean? Like, why would she be with somebody that would lose his temper or try to manipulate or control her? Gabby is to blame. She could have prevented this. Why didn't this? Why didn't that? Well, he's the one who's accountable, but now he committed suicide, so we can't hold him to blame. And well, let's look at these people. They're to blame. And with a tragedy, there's normally a lot of individuals that could have done things differently that may have prevented a tragic outcome. That doesn't mean they're to blame.
No.
Right? That doesn't mean they had... Exactly. So this is where it's sort of a fool's errand in a way, because it doesn't... I think the victimized families, it's very common that they will feel like, I'll feel better when, but then they don't. Even when justice is sort of served, there's a sense of, well, shit, I don't feel any better. Or maybe they feel a little bit better, but it's a delay of grieving in some cases. And it's a horrible situation all the way around. But I think sometimes I see that our brain tricks us into thinking that if we just have this justice, if that person is just held accountable, if that person is just publicly blamed and shamed, then I'll feel better. And that often is not the case. And it's so sad. The whole situation is just sad.
It can't be the case, right? Healing doesn't work that way. I will say, I will say it as much as I can. Somebody else changing so that you could feel better never works. This has to be, as this has to be from the inside out. What the brain is doing to us, which we're not able to catch it because of how seductive blame and guilt are, we're not getting that. You're saying it's a fool's errand, and that's actually a perfect way to put it. We're not getting that we have all of this grief and pain, right? And we don't want to sit with it. So we project it out. Right? It turns into this aggression, but it turns into this very consuming mission, right? To get this resolved over there. It is a deflection. It is a deflection. We have to sit and sit and sit until we're, I'm going to say healed for lack of a better word. But you can't off gas this. You can't project this outward. Everything, the brain will go for a temporary, it's like a drug. It'll go for a temporary hit, but then it's just going to need another one, and it's going to need another one. So it's really kicking the can, blame, and guilt are kicking the can on your own healing.
That's good.
That's what they do.
Jill, I know we're starting to get towards the end, and it does feel appropriate. I feel like we've covered the blame game, in my opinion, really well. I feel like it would be really useful for each of us to take a turn in offering our kind of top 3 strategies or top 3 steps towards actual healing. Are you okay if I go first?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so to get beyond the blame game, what I've realized, and with over 10 years of observational research in my work have found works really well. Step 1 is, it is horrible that happened to you. So anything that fits in the blame game, I'm sorry that happened to you. That was unfair. It would be unfair for anyone to experience what you experienced. That's step 1. Step 2 is, what are your choices now? Be curious about how you want to be you amidst that having happened, recognizing that you are more than what happened to you. And you are more than your pain, and you are more than any suffering that you've experienced. You are more than that. Okay? And then step 3 is allow creation of you beyond that experience. And if the brain says how, right? Ask the brain to just be curious. Well, we're just going to be curious. That's the answer to how, because the brain will trick you into thinking that there is a way. The brain will also trick you, I'll warn you, on you have to find a version of you that can operate beyond the pain, beyond the victimization, beyond the suffering. And that is not true either. You don't find a version of you, but the brain is distorted and it thinks that there's a version of you that it just needs to find, right? And that is inaccurate, it's wrong, it's deceptive, and it's a lie. But the brain doesn't see that. So by being curious, you get more in your creator layers beyond your brain that allow you to get creative, literally. And okay, so yes, that happened, but what do I want to be today? What do I want to make? You made the you that maybe have been feeling very disempowered and out of your authority in who and what you are in your life so far. You made him, you made her, and you can make more layers of you that are beyond that, where you feel more personal authority over who and what you are, what you think, what you do, what you say, and how you operate. You have that authority, and you can get creative with it, running trials every day, tests and experiments to explore and experiment until you start to feel a version of you that you liked in that moment or in that day that may not even be about whatever happened to you.
I love it. I love that you delineate the processes, because I think that's so helpful for people.
Good.
I feel like in some ways what you're talking about the first part is the same as mine. The second few parts, don't try to do all in one day, because I feel like blame is more insidious and the brain has backups to keep the blame game running. So you think you stepped out of it, and then there's a backup, as you've said. So my thing, when I first started out doing this, I just watched my brain trying to blame. That's all. I didn't care about the content. I didn't care about the deed. I didn't care about what was spurring my brain to blame, right? That's what I mean when I stay out of content. I just want to look at the mechanism, the mechanics of blame itself, that it's happening, that my brain is searching for something to blame, right? So this is the very shallow end of the pool of how you start to say, oh my God, there's my brain trying to blame that person for cutting me off, or there's my brain trying to blame my kid for something. There's my brain trying to blame my husband. And I don't care if it's because he turned off a light when you were still in a room. Look for it. This blame is insidious. And once you start to catch your brain in it, I do feel you start to gain access to work with the pieces more that you're discussing, Jill, right? Because more of you starts to come online when the brain is not preoccupied looking everywhere for who can I blame, who can I blame, who can I blame. You don't realize that it's literally happening all day long.
I want to add something because you mentioned something earlier, which was really important. It related to exactly what you're saying. If someone's brain system, their current brain system, is very focused on blame and it isn't about someone else, then it probably is about them, blaming self. So I just want to add that to what you're offering right here is if somebody's thoughts and mental brain activity is so focused on, oh, what did I do wrong today? Oh, I messed up here today. I didn't do that right today, right? Then it's similar. It fits as well with exactly what you're saying.
And a good way to notice that is it shifts often, okay? We often jump. So in psychology, what happens a lot is you grow up blaming your parents, right? And then you're in psychology for a while and you're still blaming your parents. But if you're not getting rid of blame as the construct, then it flips to blaming myself. Why do I still let my parents bother me? Right? It turns into I'm blaming myself now because I can't get them out of my head. So you want to see how insidious this blame is. That's why I'm talking about the mechanics. It's just going to keep jumping ship. And I'm so glad you mentioned the self, because if we're not getting traction blaming someone else, we're going to blame ourselves. So look at how you do that too. It's so, so important, but it's not what you blame someone for. It's that you're blaming at all.
Exactly. Do you have an example of that, of a breakthrough there? Because maybe that would be another great thing to end on here. A breakthrough of an example where you were in the process of blaming, and then you were like, wait, I don't want to do this. Why don't I do my example first? Is that okay? Since I'm the one who brought this up. I remember, and I will show this. I don't think this would be a shock to my mother if she listens to this podcast. There was a time when I felt like I didn't have a close relationship with my mother, but my middle sister did. And there was just this part of me going, okay, she's close with her. She's not close with me. I'm closer with my dad, whatever. And then as I was an adult, I realized there was a lot more tension I felt there because I wanted to feel like the adult. And my mom is like a professional problem solver. And it drove me crazy that I didn't feel my own authority of, no, if there is a problem in my life, let me fix it. Stop trying to fix that for me. I felt like she was stepping in my lane of being an adult, Jill, right? So it bothered me more, I think, as an adult, feeling more mature, feeling more capable, feeling more personal authority. She was in the way of that, was my brain reaction. So I was blaming her for being like overly involved, like, oh my God, she's always got an opinion. Oh my God, I wish she'd shut up. I mean, whatever. Probably not that, but you know what I'm saying? Just, oh my God, I can't. I don't even want to tell her about this situation because I know she'll have an answer, all these things. And then at some point more, I think as I was operating from that wider range of myself, I allowed myself to see another range of her, that she is in so many beautiful ways her father's daughter, who is a professional helper. And she can't help herself in a way from being helpful. There's no ill intent there at all. So when I can love her for that and stop seeing it as she's not intending to overstep her bounds or come in my house and say, now, are you going to fix that? As we're having a house built or something, I was like, please no fixing, Mom. Just say thank you. It's beautiful. Oh my God, this is going to be great. You know what I mean? Asking her to not be her. But I had to adjust my sense of who and what she is so that I can appreciate how she is so great at that, without making it about me, without finding anything to blame. There is really nothing to blame here. Now, then what's interesting is for me, it became less annoying because I could see it in a more grace-filled, compassionate way. This was not a crime. This was a gift that I didn't want to be a part of as part of my life. Oh, wait, for some reason I can't hear you, Jill. Hang on. Was there any muting on your side that you did?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
I really like what you're saying because a lot of times we don't we're trying to put ice cream on shit is what I like to say, right? Where we're not getting the blame out of the way and we're trying to look at, well, how are they a good person? How can I see this different? It kind of doesn't work that way, right? If you have a virus on your computer and then you try and open up another program, it's just going to infect the whole thing, right? You have to get rid of the virus first, right? So there's no workarounds here. You have to do the work with the brain in order to get new stuff coming out of it, right? And so for an example, for me, and this was such a good protracted time frame, is that we were doing construction. And let me tell you something. I mean, even right now, I just got shit blowing up all over the place. And I even said to my husband last night, this is the week of everything goes wrong, right? And the first foray, and please understand it, is like, who did that? And what did he do? And how did the plumber do that? And now I have to rip out the wall of the place I just tiled. And I have to, and it went into this really onerous, painful, like, oh, I can't believe all the work I have to do right now. But the minute I got out of blame, I still have to do all those things. But I just feel liberated. There's almost like you just move into what I'll call problem solving mode, which for you and I is a very happy mode. It's not a happy mode for other people. So just don't, getting out of blame does not put you right into problem solving if that's where you don't want to be, but it opens up your happy place, right? And it makes you so functional in your life. It just gives you such forward movement out of the mud. It's remarkable, right? So again, I still have the plumber made a mistake. I still have to rip out the wall. I still don't know if I could get the tile to match. I may have to do the whole bathroom again, but not being in blame on this, honestly, I swear it doesn't make it a big deal. I don't even know how to say it any better than that. The blame and trying to problem solve at the same time, it's like push me, pull you. They're literally at odds with one another. It's a zero-sum game. And that tug of war, so many of us feel in our lives all day long.
Yep.
You're trying to fix something and move forward while still blaming. I'm going to say it for the 5th time. Absolutely impossible.
I love it.
I love blame.
I can feel people wanting to say, it just is what it is. And there are some people are better than that at that than others. Well, it just is what it is. And other people are like, no, but I don't want to be what is. I don't want it to be what it is. Right. But we don't always get to change that. So that we could do a whole separate podcast on renovations and design and improvements and because that's just for those that don't know, Jill and I love that. So we love to take a space and make it better than what it was.
You brought that up at the end, but it's a problem. It is what it is very different things to different people. Yes. All right. So it's either victim mode or it's, and I hate the word acceptance because acceptance for me trends victim, right? I don't accept things that are unacceptable. So it is what it is. To me, is sort of like, I don't need to spend any more time on that. I'm free. What it is a liberating statement. The way you and I, that means I move into sovereignty. I'm not waiting for someone else to do anything. I'm on the move. Okay.
The weather is the weather, and I will respond accordingly. Grab a parka, get some sunscreen, whatever. Yeah. What are my choices? Air conditioning, heat.
Very good. All right.
I love that. Very good. I just also want to point out for anyone that there are so many specific topics that we have as episodes. So for some that wanted us to talk more about this or about that, check in the episode list because we've probably covered it. We have an amazing list of episodes. And every time I show Jill our list of topics that we're going to be covering or have covered in episodes, they go, oh my God, they get so excited. So in the individual portions, it may be like, but I wanted them to talk about this. Maybe we have. So look at the episode list and pick the one you want to hear next. But
And I
This
also
one
would love
was
to hear.
this one was really important. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jill.
It's super important. I would love to hear what topics people are interested in also.
Me too.
You know, I think
Yeah.
that would be really fun for people to put in, you know, whatever they're, you know, considering, and see if, you know, even if it's just a life event, we could figure out what topic that, you know, that kind of relates to it, and kind of go with that. This is one of those sleeper situations, because blame seems to the brain always justifiable. It really, really does. So it's a hard one to get around, and I'm so glad that we did it, because I think this is a huge game changer.
So good. And I love your word earlier as we're wrapping up seduction, the seductiveness of blame. It can feel so satisfying to the brain, and yet there's so much deception there, and how useful it actually is, and how that seduction can actually feel like it's in the way of us feeling creative, of being the version of ourselves that we want to be. That doesn't matter, that doesn't care about who's to blame for a certain situation.
Yeah. So good. So good. It's a wrap.
Great job, Jill. Thank you.
Love
it. I love it, and I love you.
I love you too.
I'll talk to you soon. Oh, before we wrap up, I almost forget. I want to be better about doing this. For those of you that like this episode and this podcast, thank you so much for rating it. Provide a rating. Just peek around wherever you're experiencing this. If there's a thumbs up, I know in iTunes, if you go to the bottom, there's a rating system. So wherever you're experiencing this, and leave a review, that's super helpful. Sharing this with at least 2 friends is really helpful. There's a little share option to share it to your social media. It makes it really easy. Favorite quotes that you had from it, or favorite things that maybe Jill Lankler said or that I said, putting those in a little mematic or a quotation, and then referencing the podcast is really helpful. We just really appreciate you, and hope that this is offering actionable advice for you to be a better version of you. Thank you. All right. Bye. Ciao.